Um, Gosh, now we have to get back to the question, which
Do you
was
remember what it was?
nope. Yep, now I got it. Okay. Um, Here's the problem. Belarus will not allow the invasion of Ukraine from its soil with Belarusian troops, and the Russian troops, if they're going to make that plunge, they're not going to do it by themselves. They have to have Belarusian troops with them. So there's going to have to be something that triggers this. So it would have to be, for instance, if this coalition of the willing that former NATO Secretary General Rasmussen has talked about, building out of this Vilnius summit that's going to convene on July 11th. Um, if they made a move into Western Ukraine, you could very well see a push right along the border designed to seal off the border, trap these people inside, and kill them all. But you know, every action has to take a look at supportability. Questions I would ask before I even begin to talk about that is, what are the logistical bases that will be operating out of? What are the lines of communication? Are there major highways that go that route? If you put your forces there, can the highway sustain that number of troops coming down? What's the terrain like when you get off the line of communication? Are you going to be stuck on a narrow path? Therefore, your military strung out. So now all the Poles have to do is hit the lead vehicle, hit the rear vehicle, and kill everything in between. I mean, there's a lot of things I'd have to look at before I could answer that question. Because war isn't simply about drawing lines on maps and making it look like that's the easiest thing to do. Are there swamps there? What's the cross country mobility there? The force, what's the density of the forest? And again, I just come down to, because wars are run on logistics, how am I going to supply this force? Once I commit this force in there, how will I get the supplies to them? And if I don't have the ability to have several lines of communication supporting that, I'm setting myself up for failure, because the enemy only has to fire some HIMARS rockets, cut off the supply route, or hit my depot because I haven't spread load the depot out there, blow up all my logistics, and now things die. So I have a feeling that it's not as doable as it sounds. I have a feeling that the best approach will be to come in further removed from the border, closer to logistical bases, consolidating your forces, and seeking to destroy the enemy as they get further away from their logistics. Remember, if you're coming down the border, that means you're skirting the border of Poland and Ukraine. That's what I understand. That means that you're very close. The Poles have a very short line of communications, very short logistical issue. The further you get away from your base as you drive down, the more difficult your solutions become, the easier they become. So it might be better to have them come in to Ukraine, creating distance between them and their logistics, and then you can come out of Belarus on lines of communication that are more suitable to a broader advance, more sustainable because of the available of logistics, and destroy them in battle over here. That's my thinking. But then again, what do I know?
McWood in Borneo. How many troops does Ukraine need to sacrifice to break the first defense line of the Russian forces?
They can sacrifice them all and they'll never break the first defense line of Russian forces.
Charles Whitaker from Singapore. Zelensky is blaming the West for the weapons it sent, inferior, old, etc., and didn't send, such as F-16s. To what extent do you think this will turn into anger and resentment against the West? Could pro-Nazi supporters from Ukraine that have migrated to various countries across the EU start stirring up pro-Nazi sentiment in these countries against the U.S. for its betrayal?
Answer the second part of that question first. Yes, of course. Now, what we'll do is Charles, you and I know we're going to call them Nazis, but if we call them that, there will be people out saying, "Well, you're a propagandist, you're this, that, and the other thing." So let's just start calling them Ukrainian nationalists for the purpose of just this question.
See,
We'll take
Marjorie Taylor Greene got into a lot of hot water for calling them Nazis.
Well, they are Nazis,
Yeah,
but
I know, but
yeah,
I'm saying it was like
Yeah, once you go down that route, it's difficult that, the conversation becomes about perceptions, not reality. Um, but right now, we know that there's a lot of Western Ukrainians. There's an extensive Western Ukrainian diaspora. It exists in Canada, the United States, Germany, England, Australia. Um, and when I say Western Ukrainian diaspora, that's code name for Nazis, supporters of Stepan Bandera, which is literal Nazis. That's right, American Bolshevik. Thank you for helping me out there. Um, the you know, but they're there. There's already a diaspora in place that's been politicized over decades by the CIA, by the U.S. government, et cetera. And now you have uh, people who are becoming who are more radicalized, not only by the conflict, but I do believe at some point in time Ukraine's going to wake up and understand that what's happening today is literally the manifestation of a phenomenon. I think I got that right.
Mm-hmm.
Singular. That was postulated by George Soros back in 1993 in an article he wrote about the future of NATO. And what he said is that NATO in a post-Cold War environment will still need a Russian threat to justify its existence. But that if NATO is going to build up an army that could potentially confront the Russians, then we have a problem because that confrontation will result in NATO body bags coming home. And NATO countries don't like it when body bags filled with their soldiers come home. So what Soros said is what NATO needs to be working for is a scheme to bring in Eastern European countries into the fold of NATO, not necessarily as members, but as people who think they're going to be members. They've been lured in with the promise of membership so that NATO now has a large mass of Eastern European manpower that's not part of NATO, therefore not protected by Article 5 protections. And they're going to marry it with NATO technology to be used to confront the Russians militarily, to bring harm on the Russians. This is exactly what's happening today. Exactly. And the Minister of Defense of Ukraine came out and pretty much straight up acknowledged it. He said, we're a testing ground for your technology. We're a testing ground for your weapons. Who the hell would say that? Who the HE double hop chicks would say that? Why would you say that? Why would you admit saying that? I mean, that's sick. That's criminal. What you're saying is we're sacrificing our manpower so you can develop your weapons. And he's saying it like it's a good thing. It's not. But even that's not true because there's no weapons development taking place in Ukraine today by the West. We don't trust the Ukrainians enough to give them the good stuff. We give them the bad stuff. It's all bad. It's all old. It all doesn't work. But we're still Western technology married up with Eastern European manpower to try and inflict harm on the Russians. When it collapses and the Ukrainians realize that we defrauded them because we didn't give them, let's say they bought into the George Soros, calculus. What they're buying into is the East European manpower getting the good stuff, getting that NATO technology. They didn't. They got the old stuff, stuff NATO won't even use. And I think at that point in time, there should be resentment. There should be resentment for a long time about the betrayal of the West, the betrayal of the United States, the betrayal of NATO, the betrayal of Europe. And every Ukrainian should grow up knowing about this betrayal and never again trust the collective West to when they say anything, whether it's becoming a member of NATO or a member of the European Union. The West doesn't care about Ukraine, and we know that because the West is doing nothing to stop this war that has already cost Ukraine hundreds of thousands of lives.
How dare you?
Did you see Greta is being criminally prosecuted?
Where?
I forgot where, but she was demonstrating or something and didn't disperse or some such thing as ordered. So she may be fined or even imprisoned.
I doubt she'll be imprisoned.
I doubt it too.
Yeah.
But, that's the potential penalty. Dean from the United States of America. How was the NATO war against Serbia, supposedly to protect 1 million ethnic Albanians, which created a new country by taking the territory of another, legal and moral, And the Russian war against Ukraine to protect 8 million ethnic Russians is illegal and immoral. Why don't the opponents of this NATO proxy war drive this point home continuously?
You hit it on the nose, Dean. Out of the ballpark, buddy. You're 100% correct. Look, I've been talking about this from day one. When I talk about the Article 51, you know, preemptive collective self-defense argument made by Russia. The Russians said all along, what we're doing is legal, and there's a precedent. It's called the Kosovo precedent. So NATO, what NATO did to Serbia was a crime, because here's the difference. You said to protect 1 million ethnic Albanians from what? From genocide. That's what NATO used as justified. That was the imminent threat. The imminent threat that justified preemptive collective self-defense was the impending immediacy of impending genocide on the part of the Albanians. Then once the conflict happened, basically people went back and went, yeah, there was no genocide. There was no impending genocide. This was all made up by the CIA and the Kosovo Liberation Army, which means that the Kosovo precedent that was set doesn't apply to NATO anymore, because the key element, which is a legitimate imminent threat worthy of intervention, never existed. Unlike what was going on with Ukraine and Donetsk, there's every reason to believe that the Ukrainians were assembling 60 to 90,000 troops that were prepared to attack the Donbass sometime in March. We have Zelensky in 2019, after he got elected, holding a council where he's saying, we choose war, we choose war, we choose war, in terms of liberating the Donbass and Crimea. We have, Poroshenko admitting that the Minsk Accords was a sham to buy time to build up the Ukrainian military to do what? To invade Donbass. So there's clear statements of intent there. And Russia's actions were designed to remove the immediacy of that threat. So Russia has articulated a cognizable claim under international law, namely Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, that gives them legitimacy for their action. But nobody in the West wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to
go down. His question is, why not? I mean, you agree with Dean, but he's asking, why isn't that point driven home repeatedly? Is it because people aren't familiar with it? In other words, if you're going to analogize something, people have to be familiar with that which you're analogizing. Is that possibly the reason why?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons. I'll give you an example. I wrote an article about this for Consortium News, and I was immediately attacked by people who claim to be lawyers. And the first thing they'll do is, I have a law degree and you don't. I am smarter than you because I have a law degree and you don't. And I'm like, I don't need a law degree. I mean, I can read. And I argued back, but I think a lot of people get intimidated when they say something. Then because one of the things that's lacking sometimes on social media and stuff, all that are references, sources. And when these lawyers come in and say, here's the article that was written in the prestigious Goat Roper University.
You can always find some other lawyer that says something else anyway.
Well, Jeff, you and I have had this argument when we talk about free speech. You cite you cite lawyers who say that the justice who wrote the dissenting opinion was an idiot, and I always say it was a 5-4 decision, so there were 4 idiots, and we can always find lawyers who are going to argue one way or the other. That's the bottom line. And there's a lot of people that are uncomfortable going down that route, especially if they're not lawyers. So I think you're right. People are not comfortable defending that case, because the other problem is, to defend that case, you actually have to read.
Well, that's what I mean.
You have to read a lot. I had to learn about the Caroline affair, and and it can't be superficial. You got to read it. I had to go back and read the damn opinion that was written in 1849 or whatever about the Caroline affair, which continues to be the precedent cited in international law justifying, preemptive self-defense. I had to read that and see how it was applied through history. I had to test it. I had to go in. I had to find NATO documents setting up their case, explaining why they did what they did. Read the counter to that. I mean, I was reading for 2 weeks before I wrote that article. And there's a lot of people who just don't have the luxury of time to do that either. Yeah.
Richard Schmidt from Spokane, Washington. What do you know of Susan Lindauer, a self-described former CIA asset who says she was working inside of Iraq prior to 9/11 and claims she knows that the attack was an inside job? And we've talked about this before, but I don't know that this name has come up before, so I thought it might be worth asking you.
I think Marina Voldemort showed me a video where this lady was talking, and she was like, "You got to listen to this lady. You got to." And my thing with her isn't that, first of all, if this is the same person, very articulate, comes off sounding good. But let's just go to a former CIA asset. What does that mean? Okay, it's a meaningless term, literally a meaningless term. And so if you were literally a former CIA asset, why would you use the most meaningless term to describe what you were? What were you? Were you a contractor? And, so I don't know. Maybe it was a different, because this girl didn't talk about being in Iraq. She talked about being in the White House. She talked about being involved in sexual orgies in the White House, and she was somehow a sex slave of multiple presidents or something. So this might be two different people.
Oh, sounds interesting.
But yeah, but I just need to know what a former CIA asset is. Is she an American citizen, or is she a citizen in another country? I got to do some more research. Why don't I put that dreaded asterisk next to her name, and I'll try and find out more about this, because I think I'm confusing too, because in that entire video that Marina had me watch, never once did that person, is her name Stormy, never once did that person talk about being in Iraq.
Valley is on fire tonight, by the way.
Valley is on fire.
Scott from Greece.
Greece.
A more appealing character, meaning as compared to Prigozhin, had done the coup on June 24th in Russia. Do you believe people and the military would have followed him and finally led to a bloodbath and possible civil war?
No. First of all, there wasn't a more appealing character than Prigozhin. Prigozhin had been spending millions of dollars to create this, the mythology of Wagner. They produced a very slick movie, Best in Hell, that came out, I think, in early this year. I watched the movie. Extraordinarily well done, entertaining. And you walk away from that movie with nothing but respect for Team White, because they didn't say Russians and Ukrainians. You had Team White and you had Team Yellow. And they fought very bloody battles. It was a very compelling movie. Prigozhin had hyped up Wagner, was very good at I know what asset can mean. It can mean just about anything, but that's why it's a useless term, because it means nothing. Prigozhin had created this the mythology around. So he was a national hero. I mean, that's the frustrating thing about this, because he had elevated himself to be a national hero, and literally, had he played his cards right, he could have gotten just about any outcome he wanted. But I think he started believing his own propaganda, and started believing that the Russian people were going to elevate him above the man that saved Russia. Because remember, the best Prigozhin was ever going to get was a guy who took Bakhmut. That's it. That was his accomplishment in life. I'm the guy that created a mercenary force that took Bakhmut, the meat grinder. And you could, best in hell. I'm not diminishing this. I bought into the Wagner mystique. I still do. I think Wagner was an amazing military unit, staffed with some highly credible, highly capable Russian patriots. but Prigozhin isn't one of them. Prigozhin betrayed his country. He's a traitor. Um,
But you say he
people
was
who then-
previously an appealing character. What's flashing through my mind is that video of him when he was ranting about wanting more ammunition. And I thought he came across as obnoxious, but I don't know. How did the Russian
Oh, that was a bad look for him. But look, here's another one. Example that he did. He was sitting there saying, Shoigu doesn't go to the front lines. Shoigu doesn't go to the front lines. Shoigu's in the rear, carving wood and all this kind of stuff. And then, Prigozhin goes down. He goes into the Soledar mine, salt mines. He goes into the Bakhmut salt mines. He goes to the front lines. He's in a building with his soldiers, and boom, boom, artillery shells are coming in, dirt's coming down around his head, and he's telling jokes with the soldiers. And people are watching this, going, "Wow, this guy's in the front lines. He's there with his soldiers. He's doing all this stuff." So he was an appealing character from that standpoint. People bought into the mythology of Prigozhin. But under no circumstances did anything Prigozhin do position him to supplant the man that saved Russia. Vladimir Putin is the man that saved Russia, and Russia knows this. And so Prigozhin bought into the Western perception that somehow Putin was weak or whatever. I don't know, because he knew Putin. I mean, Putin's the guy that gave him his chance. Putin got him into the inside. Putin's the guy, because he knew Putin. Shoigu gave him the food contract, $1 billion food contract, which apparently was rife with corruption and stuff. He got $1 billion contract to, manage, from a business standpoint, Wagner Group, which was a group that, from the military perspective, remember, Prigozhin's not a military man. He doesn't draw lines on maps and make things move. That's what the Commander's Council does. He's just the public face of it. This was a gift that he was given. So he should have known that he had no chance here, but he was led to believe that military officers, he believed in his own propaganda, and he believed that his propaganda was effective in turning military officers, because there was some resentment. His attacks resonated with some. They're like, Shoigu and Gerasimov, they're not very good, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I'll tell you what, they're good enough to design the defensive system right now that's beating the Ukrainians. So anybody goes, Shoigu's no good, 10-to-1 casualty ratio, guys, that's Shoigu. He's the one that got defense industry fixed and reformed to produce all the tanks, all the artillery shells, everything that's flowing its way to the front lines right now. Gerasimov's the guy that was good enough to redesign the command staff and the command structure so that you have a seamless defensive line that's actually winning hands down against the Ukrainians. So this notion that Gerasimov and Shoigu are somehow incompetent is absurd. But Prigozhin was selling this notion. People were running with it. And I think Prigozhin ended up believing his own propaganda, believing that Russia would rally behind him, that the military would rally behind him. There were Russian oligarchs that would support him, that Russian politicians would come to his support, and that while, even if the end Putin wasn't removed from power, Putin would be very much weakened by this. What president wouldn't be? Could you imagine an American president sitting in the White House while Blackwater drove up I-95 and took over the Pentagon and fired the Minister of Defense and all this kind of stuff? You might be president, but you're not a leader. You're done. You're finished. The guy that just did that's the leader, and that's what Prigozhin wanted. He wanted Putin to be a figurehead, and then to push Putin out, and for him to take over and be the new Russian hero. And what he found out is nobody supported him. Nobody, not a single person rallied to his cause. And today, now that more and more evidence is coming out about the level of his corruption, I think the Prigozhin mystique is finished.
All right. Ann Moss, the divine Miss M, is curating the comments backstage. Ann, why don't you get some live comments ready, coming in on YouTube and Facebook? Here's the final of our pre-submitted questions from Claudette.